Hola, buenas noches. So this is the last video I'm going to be making for your review. I apologize for the delay in releasing it. We still have some days before we start class, and I hope that you're going to be taking the time this week to start preparing for um, what's coming, because it seems like we are not going to be having any more delays. Bien. The topic for this last video is pretérito imperfecto. As you remember, the last video that I shared with you was pretérito indefinido, and we were looking at when do we use it. Here, we are going to be looking at our second past tense from Spanish 2. So first, ¿qué es el pretérito imperfecto? Right? Pretérito imperfecto is the name that we give to a past tense that is related to non-finished actions or events in the past. This is a general idea of what pretérito imperfecto is. In Mexico, pretérito imperfecto is called copretérito, as some of you already know. Co means con, with, and that tells us that in many cases, this past tense is not independent. That means that we are going to see in the same sentence a combination of pretérito imperfecto with presente or with pretérito indefinido. Of course, we can use this past tense independently without combining it. So we will look at all of those, the independent and the non-independent uses of pretérito imperfecto in this video. We finally will look at the conjugation of this past tense, which, if you remember, it's much simpler than pretérito indefinido. Let's begin with how do we use this past tense. As always, I give you here a timeline with pasado, futuro, y ahora. We are going to be using imperfecto to talk about regular actions or situations. In other words, things that we can consider as habits. Cuando era pequeño, jugaba al baloncesto todos los días. As you can see, in my timeline, I have all the days of the week, and for me, this is a habit. I could be repeating an action 2 or more times, but if I don't consider them to be a habit, I will be using pretérito indefinido, as I mentioned in the previous video. If you don't remember this, you can go back to that video and review it one more time. In this case, when we talk about things as pretérito imperfecto, is as if we imagine or put ourselves inside of the time in the past, and we describe the usual or regular situations there. That's why we can consider these actions to be not finished, because we are imagining, so to speak, we imagine ourselves as if we were in the situation when these things were being done. As a contrast, remember that when we talk about habits in the present, we can do so because we are in the present, and we describe our regular actions and situations. So it's the same. When we were studying Spanish 1, how to say things like, for example, normalmente tomo café con mis amigos los sábados. That's a habit. The only thing that we needed to include when talking about habits in the present tense were these time markers. Normalmente, siempre, todos los meses. If we use these time markers in the past to talk about our habits in the past, we necessarily need to use pretérito imperfecto. Second way to use this past tense. We use it to describe how people, places, things, etc. were in the past. I include here that unlike descriptions with indefinido, these are static. I will explain what's the difference. Let's take a look at this. Mi profesora tenía el pelo castaño y largo. Era muy simpática. Here I have the description I'm making of this person in the past. What I'm doing is I recover an image from the past as I remember it, and then I describe it. This doesn't mean it's the truth, of course, it's memory we are talking about. But it's like I close my eyes and I think about how my teacher was, and that image, those things that I remember from her, is what I'm telling you, and I'm describing it using pretérito imperfecto. We can describe places. El parque era muy bonito. La ciudad era ruidosa, right? The park was beautiful. The city was noisy. This is something that we did quite a lot last semester. Now, if we contrast this again, in the present, we can say el parque es muy bonito o la ciudad es ruidosa. Because we don't need to recover, or we do, because it's memory, right? Or we look at the park and that image that we see, we describe it. So these are images. They are static. They don't move. Why descriptions with indefinido were not static? If you remember, we can describe how the whole process was. When I want to say the trip was fun, I will say el viaje fue divertido. That's using indefinido because I'm considering an action that finished. With pretérito imperfecto, I'm not describing actions. I'm describing people. I'm describing places. I'm describing things, both as physical descriptions and as personality, for example. And of course, because we are describing, we are using verbo ser, era. Let's take a look at the next one. Again, we are looking at usos independientes del pretérito imperfecto. So we are only looking at imperfecto right now, even though I am comparing it to other tenses so far. Now, we can talk about short processes or long processes. You may remember this, but I also talk about this for pretérito indefinido. Now, how we talk about them is different. A las 4 cocinaba. En 2007 vivía en Tokio. What am I doing here? En 2007 vivía en Tokio. I'm talking about it as an action that was still in the process. It's similar to the English I was living or I was cooking. So in the first sentence, a las 4 cocinaba, I could say this in English as at 4 I was cooking. While the second sentence would be in 2007, I was living in Tokyo. In this case, I position myself inside of this process. Therefore, for me, the process is not finished. Sorry, this is a typo. It's not finished. There's no beginning and there is no end. I'm not telling you when did I start living in Tokyo or when did I finish living in Tokyo. When did I start cooking? When did I stop cooking? I'm just telling you that at a moment in time, this process was going on. If we remember what we were doing in pretérito indefinido, a short process was something like cociné durante 2 horas. I cooked during 2 hours. Those 2 hours are telling me the beginning and the end of my action. I consider it done. Viví en Tokio 6 años. I'm not telling you exactly when, but I'm telling you that the action finished. So my perspective is different, isn't it? Think about it that in English we are using for this past continuous. And in Spanish we do have past continuous to make emphasis. But this pretérito imperfecto is very close to past continuous in many occasions. Now let's take a look at the times when we use pretérito imperfecto as not independent, as a combination. So what is the first combination? Comparing habits and characteristics between past and present. You could see this in number 1, right? Cuando era pequeño, jugaba al baloncesto todos los días, pero ahora no juego nunca. Sandra era muy tímida antes, pero ahora es muy extrovertida. Looking at these 2 sentences, I have 2 verbs in each. Jugaba, juego. Era, es. It's the same verb. One is in pretérito imperfecto to talk about the past, and one is in the present to compare. Right? Tímida is in the past. Sandra era muy tímida, pero ahora es extrovertida. And comparing it, these are 2 adjectives that we could consider to be the opposite. I'm recovering both images from when I was a child or when she was a child and as she is now. And I compare them and I think they are different. So that's why I'm using pero, right? I'm just comparing the past. If Sandra has never changed, I don't need to compare past and present. Now, besides comparing habits or comparing how we describe people in the past and the present, we have combinations of the 2 past tenses. And this is the key. If you remember, we were doing quite some practice about it. And we will continue working with these 2 past tenses in Spanish 4 And if you want to keep practicing this semester, I can always look for more practice for you. I recommend that you read as much as possible and that you watch as many things as you can to get in the habit of listening to how we use past tenses and the combination of these two past tenses in particular. Let's take a look. I express the momentary situation that can be the context of another action. This sounds a little bit complicated, but let's take a look at the examples and see how we can actually understand it quite clearly. Cuando estaba en el tren, vi a un hombre muy raro con barba y gafas. When I was in the train, I saw a man that was very weird and had a beard and glasses. Estaba en el tren is a process. I was in the train for quite a long time. What happened while I was in the train? That I saw this guy. You can see he looks a little bit weird, right? Ahí así, un poco raro. Ver, vi a un hombre is a momentary action. It's an action that finished because I'm not looking at him for a long time. I saw him. Okay. Saw him. While the train was in a process. Ayer, Sandra y Ramón no vinieron a clase porque estaban enfermos. In this case, estaban enfermos. I don't know when did it start or finished. This is a condition, a situation. And because of that, they did not come. Right? So being sick is a condition that I'm indicating is the reason why they did not do something. Okay? There are relations of action and situations. Being in a train was a situation. So seeing this guy was an action. Being sick was a situation. Not coming to school was an action. And in this case, not doing the action. Remember, however, that porque is not always with imperfecto. We can say Sandra y Ramón estaban enfermos. Again, this is a situation. Why were they sick? Because they ate something that was bad. Sandra y Ramón estaban enfermos porque comieron algo malo. If we compare, Sandra y Ramón no vinieron a clase porque estaban enfermos, we see that we can use both tenses as the reason. So you cannot just think, oh, okay, easy, I got it. Every time that I see por qué in the past, I'm going to use pretérito imperfecto, like the sentence. Ayer Sandra y Ramón no vinieron a clase porque estaban enfermos. But that's not true. It's not a relationship of one word, por qué. It's how we consider these things to be. Cuando estaba en el tren, vi a un hombre muy raro con barba y gafas. It could also be that I saw him when I arrived to the station. And in that case, when I arrived to the station, is an action. So it will be cuando llegué a la estación, vi a un hombre muy raro con barba y gafas. And in that case, we are just doing what we saw in the previous video. We are seeing a sequence of actions. I arrived and then I saw him, right? So cuando can be associated with an action, cuando llegué a la estación, or with a condition, cuando estaba en el tren. Okay, so it's not so simple, and that's the reason why we need to keep reading and keep checking so that with practice, we will get to be able to use it better. At this point, I really want you to be able to simply decipher, analyze for a little moment in your head when you are reading. If you see these two past tenses, hey, why are they using it? Oh, I see. Because that's what is going to give you some practice, and then you will be able to understand it better. This is a little bit what I was mentioning. Okay, we remember that we have pretérito indefinido for finished one-time actions, while imperfecto refers to ongoing actions or situations. Okay, these relations of time and cause and effect are very normal, and we have different ways of combining them, as I just mentioned. Finally, let's take a look at the conjugation for this past tense. Verbos regulares are quite easy, right? We have infinitivo en AR. These verbs are going to be like this. Yo viajaba. Tú viajabas. Él viajaba. Nosotros viajábamos. Vosotros viajabais y ellos viajaban. Now, in ER or IR, we have the same conjugation. Yo comía, tú comías, él comía, nosotros comíamos, vosotros comíais y ellos comían. O yo vivía, tú vivías, él vivía, nosotros vivíamos, vosotros vivíais y ellos vivían. So we have two very clear distinctions between AR verbs and ER or IR verbs. In this case, irregulares, there are only three that we can see in pretérito imperfecto. Verbo ser, yo era, tú eras, él era, nosotros éramos, vosotros erais y ellos eran, is one of them. Don't forget that the first person plural has tilde. Verbo ver is also irregular. Yo veía, tú veías, él veía, nosotros veíamos, vosotros veíais y ellos veían. Why is it irregular? Because it should be yo veía. We are adding an extra E so that it sounds better. Verbo ir, yo iba, tú ibas, él iba, nosotros íbamos, vosotros ibais y ellos iban, will be the last of our irregular verbs. And that's it. Now it's time for you to take a look at this, review it, and then try your hand on Quizlet. I hope that these videos were useful for you guys, and I'll see you in class very soon on Zoom.